Welcome back to the Practical People Manager podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with employment lawyer Nic Elliott. In this episode, we get into absence management, and I know this is an area that so many managers find tricky to deal with, especially when absence becomes regular, long-term, or more complex. Nic and I talk about return to work conversations, why they need to be more than just a form to complete, and how good records can really help both the manager and the business. So if you manage people, you support managers, or you've ever wondered whether you're handling absence in the right way, this episode will be a helpful one. Absence.
Yeah.
Let's talk about absence. So what are the most common mistakes you think we have with absence management? What aren't we doing right?
So I do a lot of absence management work with clients.
Yeah.
Both short-term intermittent absence, I describe it, and long-term absence.
Yeah.
And I think with the short-term stuff in particular, I am a fan of, and I know they've kind of gone out of fashion a little bit because they're a bit of a hassle for managers.
Yeah.
But I'm a fan of return to work interviews, meetings.
100%. Yeah, me too.
It creates audit trails.
Yeah.
Lawyers like audit trails when it comes to issues that then follow.
Yeah.
But it also is just a check-in. It's another one of those conversations that managers can have with their people to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And it might be that it is just unfortunate they, caught a tummy bug or they had a cold or, I've had young kids and you get a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that can happen. Or it might be that there's more to it. And I think tracking that well is important in that area. When it comes to longer term absence, the issue that I see missed most of the time is getting good medical evidence.
Yeah.
And I'm a massive fan of getting good occupational health support. And without dissing the OH community, that's not always been very positive.
Yeah.
I think it's been difficult to get good, robust occupational health advice that is clear and helpful for employers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I've had to do is try and help employers get the best medical advice they can by asking the right questions and also just encouraging them not to accept poor advice.
Yes.
But that's so vital because employees, the way I describe it is employees don't know what's wrong with them and what's best for them often, even if you're going through it yourself. Yeah. The reason we have medical professionals is because we're not all skilled medical professionals that will even know how best to treat what we have. Yeah. So they can't be expected to know what's best for them in the workplace, and neither can employers because they're not medical professionals either. Yeah. So someone that has that medical knowledge and the knowledge of the workplace is invaluable in those situations in terms of making that situation better and helping managers then provide the right support to those people. Yeah. But it also helps minimize legal risk massively, because if you're following that medical advice and you've asked the right questions and you've informed yourself as to what you need to do, then that's key.
Yeah. So it's interesting to say about return to works. I'm a big supporter of return to works. Yep. I think the battle that I've had is managers just see it as a bit of a tick box. Yep. So won't name any names. They'll know who they are. Where an employee will ring up sick for that day or however, and when the phone goes down, they automatically go to the form. They fill it all in without the person there, by the way. Mm-hmm. So when the person then comes in, it's like, here, sign it, and it's like, well, where's the conversation? Yeah. And to your point, I think you get a lot of valuable information from that conversation, don't you? Around what's happened, what's going on, any medication, but also is there anything else underlying that you don't know about? Yeah. So, I always say to my managers, like, this is a really valuable conversation. It's just a shame they think, well, it's just another form for us to complete, really. Agreed. But it's good to know from your point of view, that's also stuff that you might need to take with you if it was to go down a different route.
Absolutely. And again, my bit tends to be, this is not improving. Yeah. We've kind of tried to support. We've got medical advice. It's only really going one direction now. Either we're going to try and one more, attempt at making this work, or unfortunately the person's probably going to have to leave the organization. Yeah. And being able to evidence the fact that that manager has had good conversations, that they've logged absence, even just logging absence in itself, often, particularly for smaller employers that don't have amazing systems and all that kind of thing. Keeping track of that is really important when it comes to then managing, the end process, I guess.
Then with occupational health, I think one of the fears, or one of the feedback I always get from managers is, occupational health, they do their bit and you get the recommendation. Mm-hmm. I think there's also that, well, do we have to do what they say? Because sometimes it's stuff that the business might think, well, I can't do that. 9 times out of 10, I'm sure we can do. Yep. But I think there's a I suppose they hold themselves back from referring to OHD because they're worried about what OHD might say.
Yeah, and there is always that risk.
Yeah, yeah.
So I agree with you. And, you know, one of the things that I talk to clients about is we're going to do this referral. There is the possibility that they'll say something that we don't like.
Yeah, yeah.
But we'll have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But also the way that you make that referral, and again, that's a lot of the work that I do with clients, is helping them write that referral in a way that is maximizing the chances that they get back useful information that's helpful to them. That's really key. And you're right, they're usually recommendations.
Yeah.
You hope that occupational health have an understanding of your workplace.
Yeah.
Though they may not, because it might not be on site.
Yeah.
It may have been a telephone, appointment the person's had. But again, I think the onus is on the employer to build in as much of that as they can to the referral, which again, I don't see that much of.
Yeah.
So saying things like, here's the job description for the person that is, and this is the role that they do, describing the environment in which they're working, describing the impact that their absence is having on the rest of the team, talking about the business impact that their absence is having more widely, the cost that it involves and so on, is actually really important, not just we have concerns about this person because they're sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think building that wider picture is useful for occupational health because they will get a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
And it allows the employer to put their side of things too, because often an employee that's particularly on long-term sick sometimes will have a negative view of their employer. They don't tend to be super positive about their workplace or their employer generally. That tends to be my experience.
Yeah.
And therefore rebalancing the impression that is given to occupational health a little bit is helpful, I think, for employers too. So managers who are asked to input into that kind of process, I think, can add a lot of value by saying, well, this is the impact it's having on my team. And you know, this is what we're having to do and whatever it might be as a result of this absence. We would love them back. We know we've got a duty of care to them. But, you know, there is a wider context to this.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get someone actually from occupational health to come on here because I think there's that real, do you understand the, you know, what the purpose of the, you know, occupational therapist is, what's the value, how can they support you? Because I think a lot of people don't understand. And when we do welfare means or absence, the first thing I say is, can we get occupational health involved to do a real assessment of where we are? And also I think some of the recommendations is to protect us, to see, are we doing what we should be doing? So I do think it's probably a big topic that a lot of managers actually have no understanding really of what OHD can do.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
And I've I think in recent time found a couple of providers who I rate and I think that are employer focused at the same time as understanding their responsibility to the individual that is effectively kind of becoming under their medical care.
Yeah.
One in particular has even asked me to spend some time with them talking about employers and what they find useful, and I was like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
because actually they wanted to do better for their clients as well as doing the right thing by the individuals whose health they're assessing. So they do exist.
Yeah, which is great. Great stuff. And what about actually going to their doctor directly? So I've done previously where, I don't even know if OHD have been involved, but I've actually written to their doctor and just asked them for advice or asked them for a prognosis, sent a job description. That I found more of a struggle, if I'm honest with you, to kind of get that information back.
Yep. So, yeah. I have to be careful because I've got into trouble in certain situations bashing GPs.
Right.
So both my parents worked in the NHS. I'm very pro NHS. But my experience of GPs is that they effectively will regurgitate what an employee says about a situation. Yeah. And I understand why. They have very much primary kind of responsibility for that individual's care. Yeah. And often they will want to do the right thing by that individual and they will want to say what they think is best for them. Yeah. But they don't understand the work context, the other side of things that we were describing in terms of what you can feed into occupational health to give them the full picture. Yeah. And I think, therefore, it's kind of advice that is often lacking in that wider context. And it makes it difficult if you can even get advice from them because, you know, bless them, they're very, very busy. Yeah. And sometimes you can get consent from the individual, write to the GP and not hear for weeks and weeks and weeks, which again is not helpful when it comes to managing absence well. So I can't remember... You know, I've been doing this, 20 odd years. I can't remember a single time really where I've suggested to an employer that going to the GP is a good idea.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a cost involved in going to occupational health, but actually that's in the scheme of things not too bad when it comes to the potential risk of some of these situations.
Yeah, well, some of the GPs they charge as well. Actually, we've stopped doing that. I've stopped because I think, like you said, the quality of the information wasn't great. The length of time it took. And also occupational health that we deal with have said, well, let me help you with that. I'll contact the doctor. And I suppose maybe there's more of a collaboration there than to come into a HR person directly. It's always interesting. Oh, which is good. So when you're looking at thinking about long-term sick now, so I suppose in my world, long-term sick is normally kind of deemed from like 4 weeks onwards. Is that a good time frame to kind of, would you say, to categorize something that's long-term?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And different employers kind of view it differently in terms of what they do.
Yeah.
After, certain periods of time. I don't. What do I think? I would like to see engagement before that 100%, period of time.
Yeah.
I guess the level of engagement, might depend. And also, some of these things, you might get a sick note, which is immediately for a month.
Yes.
And you know that that's going to happen. Or you might get a series of 1 week, absences or whatever. But again, I think if someone's off for, 2 weeks for something that usually, or has the potential to be longer.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone has an operation on their leg and there's a recovery period, they're usually quite open about that.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you know they're going to be off for a period of time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily be suggesting that you immediately go to occupational health and try and get help with that. If it's a mental health thing, so someone's off with anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, and you get a 2 week note and then you're thinking, okay, well, we have no idea what this is about or whether this person's going to be back after that period of time. I might be suggesting that there's a kind of more robust kind of management of that, which might include occupational health sooner.
Yeah.
Because you think, well, actually, we could do with more information because we don't really know what's going on. We don't know whether it's work related or personal stuff or whatever. And actually, it's going to be useful for us to understand more about that and what we can do to support that person back into work, particularly if it turns out to be work related.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really have a definition of the kind of length of time that would be, but you're right. If you're starting to get to a month where someone's not been in the workplace, it certainly starts to feel quite long term to them, and I think probably to their colleagues.
Yeah, and people always say the longer you're out for work, the harder it is to return, isn't it? And I think that process or procedure, policy, whatever you want to call it, when someone's off on long-term sick seems to be quite extensive.
Yep.
I mean, for you, what would be the principles around long-term sick and, from start to finish? I don't mean for them to leave the business, but to return them either. Yeah. What would be ideal, do you think?
So, well, I think you're right on your point about, the longer it is, the less likely they are to come back.
Yeah.
I can't remember whether I've shared my longest sickness absence story with you, which was a client that phoned up as the first job we were doing for them. And they said, we've got a long-term sickness absence issue. Yeah. Can you help us with it? And I was like thinking, yes. So, I was a couple of years qualified at the time. Yeah, absolutely. This is what I do. This is my specialist area. I said, how long have they been off? Yeah. And they said 19 years.
19 years.
And I said, sorry, you mean 19 months? and they said, no, 19 years. We forgot about him.
Oh no.
So this guy he was actually a lawyer.
Right.
In a big institution in London. I won't name him. And basically he'd fallen out with his manager.
Right.
And he'd gone off with stress.
Right.
That turned to depression. He went on to a permanent health insurance policy.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And he was getting 75% of his salary for 19 years.
Wow.
Until he walked into reception 19 years later and said, I think we better bring this to an end.
Do you remember me? Yeah.
And of course they had no idea.
No.
So they'd forgotten about him. His personnel file, as it would have been then, had a paper file had gone into a filing cabinet. His manager had left. The HR team had changed. And I think a nurse from the insurance company was going out every year saying, stressed and depressed still? Yeah, fine, tick. And it just rolled on.
Right.
So that was an interesting one. They said, we want you to risk assess it.
Yes, well, where to begin?
So most people avoid that kind of scenario. But I think the key one is keeping in touch.
Yes.
So I guess that's a good example
100%
of that. And again, that comes up with managers in particular, where they're saying, well, they've told me that, they don't want to be at work, they're not well, and I shouldn't make contact. I always kind of err on the side of you should make contact.
Yeah. It's welfare, isn't it? Checking in, how
exactly,
you doing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, some employees will find that oppressive.
Yeah.
And that's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
But it depends what that check-in is.
Yeah.
And that can take, different forms. I had a client recently where they were doing weekly check-ins, but they've been off for a number of months, and they said, could we not do it monthly? Yeah. And I think that was fine. We switched to that. So keeping in touch, medical advice we've covered. It's just so important.
Yeah.
And that's about what adjustments we might make to help get the person back into work, what the managers can be doing. And then but it's also about, in those scenarios, I think if someone's been off a long time, it's often then about the likelihood of them returning.
Yeah.
And avoiding occupational health saying things like they'll be off for the foreseeable future. Yeah. Because who knows how long that is.
Yeah.
So again, the questioning around that is important in terms of getting certainty from occupational health. And I've got a bit of a methodology for that. And then I think it's effectively kind of talking to the employee, keeping in touch, the legal phrase might be consultation.
Yes.
Medical advice. And then I think the other bit is business need. Again, I think weaving in to all of this, even talking to the employee about, we would really like you back because we need you in the job.
Yes.
And other people are having to do this, or we're having to incur the cost of temporary cover, or that kind of thing. I think it's actually fine to do that too.
Yeah.
Not in a kind of, again, an oppressive way where you're putting pressure on the individual, but it's the reality.
Yeah.
Your colleagues are missing you.
Yeah.
We really miss having you being able to do this. Let's talk about how we can get you back.
Yeah.
That's important too.
Yeah.
But again, I probably get a slightly skewed view of these situations where they don't go well.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that actually people do have periods of time out where they've not been well, and they then do return, and employers handle it very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is possible.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do agree with you. The longer the person's away, the more difficult it is for them to come back, whatever the cause of that is.
But that's why that contact's important, isn't it? So regular check-ins, how are you doing? Just chatting. What's an update on your health? What support are you getting? Because I think that then makes it easier. I always say as well, do you want regular updates from the business? How we're doing? Like newsletters? What do you want from us to keep you connected? And some might say, I don't want anything, and that's fine. But some might say, well, actually, I'd like to know.
And if you explain why you're offering that, that's helpful too, isn't it? Our experience is people start to feel a bit disconnected after a period of time if we don't do this. So we'd love to do this for you. And if they point blank refuse, and then fair enough. But at least you've tried. At least
you've offered, And it's interesting you said about group income protection, which I think most companies have. I mean, if someone's off on long-term sick and there's I think, we kind of decide that there's probably no way that person can return. Where do we stand with group income protection? I think there's the one where you think they're protected, so we can never touch them. They will carry on being paid until whatever the duration is. How does that work?
Well, so the reality is that's pretty much the position.
Yeah.
Which is why I think increasingly I'm seeing employers moving away from it.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of clients. In fact, I was talking to one this morning about this, and they were saying, we bought into this because we wanted to look after our people. Yeah. And we think it's really, really important that we're able to support them. And from a cost perspective, it's really, really helpful to us because it's covered. Yeah. But however many years on, they're now finding that they have too many people on long-term sick. And that actually it's just becoming a drain in whatever way, be the premium increasing or just the fact that there's the kind of uncertainty in the teams, because they're like, well, we've covered the role with this person, but there is this other person kind of in the background who might come back at some point, but we don't really know. And it gets difficult. The legal difficulty is, you're right, that if someone's on that kind of policy and they qualify, or if they're not on the policy but they qualify, dismissing them and not putting them on the policy can be an unfair dismissal. And once they're on the policy and receiving that, you can't really dismiss them either. No. And they're effectively stuck until they are well enough to come back. Yeah. Or, and I've seen this a few times, a bit like the 19-year example. Oh, yeah. They come and say, actually, I think we should bring this to an end. And I've seen a couple acted for an individual one time. Actually, we don't do much of that kind of work, but she had been on that kind of policy for quite some time, and the employer and the insurer basically said, "Look, we'll give you a lump sum payment. Kind of accelerate the the money that you'd receive in order that this is brought to an end. And effectively you had a settlement agreement with the insurer and the employee that was just about that money, and then a separate settlement agreement for the employment side. And that is one way you can deal with it, but that involves 3 parties agreeing that that's a good idea. And on that occasion, the employee was like, I think it's probably a better way. I'm happy to kind of break ties here and move on, even though I'm still not very well. But it doesn't happen that often. I don't think. No. So that is a downside of that kind of policy. So I think a lot of people are reevaluating actually whether it is a good idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then going back to intermittent absence then, what would be your principles for how you'd manage that?
Usually it's about the manager keeping track of it and having those conversations that we talked about. And I suppose in some ways, managers, it being okay in those kind of scenarios for managers to be a little bit suspicious.
Never. Are they?
And in some ways, I'm okay with that when it comes to that kind of absence, if it's a pattern of behavior. And partly because either there's something bigger going on, and therefore their suspicion might prompt a conversation about, okay, well, maybe this person's got some sort of underlying health condition, or maybe they're caring for elderly parents and actually they're not really sick. It's that this is an issue, or their kids are not well, or whatever it might be. Or that the person's taking the mickey. And actually the manager is spotting that and thinking every single Monday, they seem to be off. And I know I saw on Facebook that they were at the pub last night and all of a sudden they're not well, today. And stuff like that happens. I think we can get carried away with that kind of thing sometimes, and managers become, super sleuths. Particularly even on long term. So people will go, well, I saw them, they're on Facebook doing this, that, or the other. And of course, that's not a given that's not, that's a problem, because of course, particularly with mental health stuff, actually going on holiday and relaxing and get away from it all might be okay. Though I did have one particular case of it was a PA who said that she couldn't type letters. So problems with hands and fingers and that kind of thing. And she was spotted on Facebook playing the penny whistle in a folk band, which
interesting
suggested maybe the hands weren't as bad as
oh dear
as she was making out. So there are occasions where that is helpful. But I think actually a level of interest, shall we say, maybe suspicion's not necessarily the right word, in that kind of absence, and looking at the pattern is actually a good idea. And then having the conversation, it still comes back to that conversation.
No, definitely. And as you say about suspicion, I think with all my work that I've done in HR, the managers will always be suspicious straight away, or here we go again, it's Monday, he's off, he's another long weekend, or there's other one that we have as well, is dependence leave. So people taking advantage of that. And obviously for us, dependence leave is unpaid. It's for last minute absences due to childcare, or maybe you're a carer for somebody, but people who are repeatedly taking it more frequently than if it was just an emergency. So where do managers stand with managing something like that?
It is tricky. And I worked with a client recently actually who had been told that there was nothing you could do about that kind of situation, which I thought was interesting. And then we started working together and they're like, this can't be right, can it? And I was like, well, no, it's not. And that was a combination of sickness absence, but then kind of emergency leave for different family members and kids and that kind of thing. But it was so regular that it was a really quite significant pattern of absence. And that employer was tracking it really well. So we could tell what it was and how often it was happening. And the managers did a good job of addressing it and talking to the individuals about it. And again, I think for me, even with that type of absence, if it's a pattern that is sustained over a period of time and it's beyond what you would expect as the employer, addressing it with the individual is still okay. Again, I think in those scenarios, people are like, oh gosh, it was sensitive because somebody died or someone was really unwell, and having sympathy with those things is important. But you do get to a point where you think, and it's the classic, it's the 8th grandparent to pass away or whatever, but there are situations where that happens, and I think it's okay to call that out if you think you've got good evidence for it. The key is good evidence.
Yes.
Because actually somebody might have had a really, really rough time and had a very unfortunate period of, difficult emergency situations, and that does happen. So, being clear that you're on good ground for challenging it is a good idea, but also it's the way you do it. It's the same kind of conversation again about, is there something going on that we need to talk about or that we can help you with, or that kind of thing, rather than we think you're lying,
Yeah, no, definitely. And in regards to kind of stages of managing absence then for intermittent, where I've commonly work, it's like 3 occasions before you go into like a first, and then it's 1 occasion onwards. Is that pretty standard procedure?
So it really does vary. There's things like the Bradford factor and all that kind of thing, which again, I don't particularly like. It's very rigid and complicated. So I think different employers take different approaches. And again, for me, it's one of those kind of culture things again. So it's like, well, how much are you going to tolerate? What kind of process are you going to put in place? How are you going to address these things? But you're right. Often it's number of absences within a certain period of time, or for whatever length, that will trigger something, some kind of intervention, which I think is fine, and where you pitch that isn't really that much of an issue, I don't think. More risky is, dismissal and warnings, if you get towards the end of the process, but starting that process early, I think is probably advantageous, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then I suppose in line with absence and long-term and short-term, reasonable adjustments. So again, another pushback from managers always like, why do we have to do this? You know, what do you define as being reasonable, or how much do the business have to invest in adjustments, do you think?
So that is a very common thing. And it's not an easy answer.
No.
And I think that's why actually employers struggle with it so much. And, there's not really even, as a kind of expert who deals with this stuff, the kind of what's reasonable or not answer is actually quite tricky to help advise on. Often what we will do is look at other cases where similar situations have arisen and what was found to be kind of reasonable, in inverted commas, in those scenarios. But it will nearly always be a kind of fact-based thing. It'll be a case-by-case scenario. And that's partly because the Equality Act legislation that covers this area talks about the factors that come into play when an employer is deciding what they can do in those scenarios. And it's things like the size of the employer, the resources that they have, and so on. So, there have been cases where people have asked for really very expensive equipment, for example, that they need to be able to do their job because of an ill health issue. And the employer's gone, there's no way that we can afford £50,000 on this piece of really specialist equipment. But actually, there will be scenarios where there might be something very expensive, maybe not quite as much as that. And actually, if it's a massive global, perceived as very well-off employer, then that might be what they have to do. Whereas if it's a 2-director, 5-person company working out of a tiny office with a small turnover, then it wouldn't be reasonable for them to have to spend that kind of money on an adjustment, even if it was recommended or necessary or whatever. So it really is very kind of fact specific. But the way, I guess I try and bring just a common sense approach to it, which is like, how unreasonable does it really feel? And actually I think as a manager, you might have a bit of a skewed view of that because you think, well, this is a hassle to me, or we're going to have to change our ways of working, or we're going to have to get other people to do certain things that this person can't, or that kind of thing. And certainly for an HR team, what I often say is you can be a bit more of an independent kind of view on this and say, do you know what, actually we did it over here with this team. So manager, you're going to need to think about whether you can, because actually it worked okay over there. Or maybe the reverse of that, which is, well, we tried that with this person who had a very similar situation and it didn't work. So maybe it's not one that we could put in place, but let's explain why. So it's not easy. Often, employers will have a list of recommendations from occupational health or whatever it might be, or even from the individual who says, I think I need this. And usually what I suggest is like just a table or a spreadsheet where you put them in and you work out what the impact's going to be and document some explanation as to why you can or can't do them. And when it then comes to worst case scenario, an employment tribunal claim, it's a brilliant way of saying, well, we didn't fail to implement reasonable adjustments. We absolutely introduced those that we could. And here's a really detailed and lovely explanation as to why we couldn't do these ones.
That's good.
And that, it's almost, well, it's a great way of defending a claim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I've always been taught that you try and make adjustments, but a tribunal might say you could have done more. So to your point, I suppose it's proving what you have been able to do and why you haven't been able to do the rest. Absolutely. Yeah.
And, there are certainly times where employees ask for stuff themselves that's just unreasonable.
Yeah, yeah.
And you think, that's not going to happen. Yeah. So I, for example, did some time on secondment at one of the big banks, UK banks, and we had someone who was working behind they were a cashier in the bank, and they said, I need a reasonable adjustment, and that is working only 1 day a week from home.
And they're a cashier.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you get the idea, so what the customer's going to take the money and post it through their letterbox at home. It's just not going to happen. So, people ask for stuff that is not reasonable. And that's a very extreme example, but it does happen. And actually employers pushing back on that, as long as they're giving a good business reason for it, I think is okay.
Yeah.
If it makes sense that you can't do this for these really good reasons, not only is it a good way of kind of building that audit trail to defend any claim that might come, but it makes sense to the individual often. If you explain it and say, well, actually, I know that might be really good, but here's why.
Yeah.
And they sometimes accept that.
Yeah, no, definitely. God, that's amazing. Is that real? That's not real. Did someone ask for that?
That example? Yeah, absolutely.
No way.
Yeah.
People never cease to amaze me. Huh?
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of part 2 with Nic Elliott. I hope this episode had helped you think differently about absence management, return to work conversations, and the value of getting occupational health involved at the right time. One of the big messages from this conversation is that managers don't need to have all the medical answers, but they do need to ask good questions, keep clear records, and know when to get the right support. In the final part of this conversation, Nic and I move into some of the more sensitive areas managers may face, including menopause, protected characteristics, documentation, and how to manage people fairly while reducing risk. I'll include Nic's contact details and any useful links in the show notes so you can connect with him and explore more of his work. You'll also find my details there, including my LinkedIn and the People Expert, where I support managers and organisations with practical HR, coaching, mediation and leadership development. If you found this episode helpful, please like, follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who manages people. It really does help the podcast reach more managers who may need this kind of practical support. And remember, being a great people manager is not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to listen, learn, and support the people around you. Thank you for listening to the Practical People Manager.